Good evening and welcome to episode 17 of the Ecuador Insider Podcast. I'm Darnell Dunn. I'm joined here by my business partner, Jesse Bayer. We've got an exciting show for you, including a guest speaker, Ben Berger of MLS Ecuador and PropertyShelf.com. Before we get into that, we're going to go over some business. First of all, you can reach us at www.abecuador.com. That's A as in Apple, B as in boy.com. Toll-free line, 888-999-0948. Or you can reach us via email at info@abecuador.com. Again, joining us today is Ben Berger. Ben is the founding partner, CFO, and business development manager for Latin America at PropertyShelf.com. Property Shelf works with regional organizations to develop real estate market data tracking, reporting, and the property and development management solutions to help build efficiencies and standardizations in the local real estate industry. PropertyShelf.com is a majority owner of MLS Ecuador. So Ben will be chatting with us a little bit about his background, more about the MLS service here in Ecuador. There's a lot of misconceptions out there that Ecuador doesn't in fact have an MLS, so Ben will get into that a little bit, as well as his outlook on the market and anything else he'd like to share. So without further ado, Ben, thanks for joining us, and we appreciate you being here. How did you end up moving here to Ecuador?
Okay,
Ben, you there
Darnell.
with us?
I sure am, Darnell. Thanks so much for having me on today. I got started with Property Shelf back in 2009. A buddy of mine partnered up with a German firm, a software firm. And we started off in Costa Rica looking to build more sophisticated technology tools for a market that really seemed to be lacking. We started in Costa Rica and expanded to Nicaragua, Panama. In 2011, I arrived in Ecuador and absolutely just fell in love with it. So we relocated here, and I've been managing things here ever since.
Oh, cool. And you said who did you relocate here with?
I came here by myself, but at this point, my wife and brother-in-law are both an active part of the company, and we've hired Ecuadorians who've taken on a very active role in running MLS Ecuador.
Hey Ben, when you say that some of the market tools in Costa Rica were lacking, can you expound on that a little bit in terms of what you found there and what you thought you guys could bring to the market in that way?
I think it was a very similar situation that we walked into in Costa Rica as we found in Ecuador. There wasn't a central database that real estate agents were using. There wasn't a lot of cooperation between real estate agents. There weren't good tools to provide market comparables. And when we got to Costa Rica, it was in 2009, Costa Rica had been a very, very hot market for the last 8 to 10 years. So we saw just huge numbers and huge quantities of international money coming into Costa Rica, and specifically Costa Rica real estate. And yet, the more sophisticated tools that we'd seen in the United States really since the late 70s, early 80s, when people started cooperating and using the MLS framework, it still wasn't there at that time. So we sought to change that.
Yeah, because I know, Darnell usually deals with the listings on MLS in Ecuador, but I know just from chatting with him that you guys have a very detailed fields in terms of like the layout of each listing. There's a whole array of information that you have to enter in order to list the property, which I think is really useful. That's really something that, we saw the same thing when we came to Ecuador, more specifically Southern Ecuador, as far as just what a lack of information there was internationally as far as being able to access listings and get good information on them. So I know from my perspective, you guys are really doing great work in terms of bringing that piece of the market to Ecuador.
Thank you. We've tried to be an agent-first system. A lot of times when people are just browsing properties, really what they're looking for is images. And so there are a lot of classified sites that really are just focused on quick, easy listing entry, image-heavy content. But at the same time, if you've got two real estate agents trying to work together to co-op on a property, both sides need to understand, all of the questions. They need to be able to answer the questions that a typical buyer might have. So we've tried to have a very comprehensive data set for all properties, but at the same time, there is that need to be user friendly, and we've tried to balance those two.
And Ben, for people who are not familiar with it, can you just explain exactly what a multi-listing service is and what it does?
The concept of a multiple listing service was being utilized in the U.S. way before there was even an internet. In the 70s, it started off as a phone line, and people were calling in and saying, okay, there was an operator and said, okay, I've got a buyer here, and I need to find a property that's 3 bedrooms in this neighborhood that's between $200,000 and $220,000. What do you have? And that person would have a written down database, and they would provide them with property information that was available. So it was really
that is so interesting. I did not know that.
That unified database, and then it went on to being a book that they printed out every week, and somebody drove around and passed it to all the real estate agents' office. And obviously, with the internet, I mean, it's much more sophisticated to the point that we totally take it for granted. A real estate agent across the country can make a change, and it's updated across 25 websites. The core of the MLS is that 2 real estate agents can work together. One represents the buyer, one represents the seller, and there's not a need to list with 40 different real estate agents. You list it once, it's in the system, and every other real estate agent, if they have the buyer that's looking for that kind of property, can go in the system, whether it's internet-based, phone-based, book-based, and find the right property for their buyer. So if you have a great relationship with a client that you meet in Loja, but maybe they don't even know whether they're going to buy in Loja or Cuenca or Cotacachi, if you have that relationship with them, if they like working with you, you should be a perfect property for them, whether or not it's in your area, because you'll have that relationship, you'll have that platform where you're in a position to co-op with real estate agents across the country. And that's really what the core idea of the MLS is.
And that's just been really invaluable to us. And that's what we feel we bring to the table. And that's really been our sort of pitch to our clients here in Ecuador, who are really not, for the most part, accustomed to signing exclusive listings. We feel that puts us in the best position to represent their interest and get the best outcomes possible. And so that's been something that we've included in our marketing materials, and working with agents through MLS has just been a real help for us. So we appreciate everything that you're doing there. Secondly, related to MLS, why is it that so many people think that there's no MLS service in Ecuador? Can you address that?
In the U.S., which is where the MLS really dominated, there is that culture of exclusivity. 99% of properties are represented by one single agent. That agent lists the properties on the system, and the culture in Ecuador just isn't like that. And we've ran into this in Costa Rica and Panama and Nicaragua and everywhere that we operate. And without that culture of exclusivity, what you end up having is, I know a lot of real estate agents that are representing 150, 200 properties on their own. And these aren't big companies. This is a single person, may not even be operating out of an office. I mean, this may just be a home office. And yet they feel like they've got 200 listings. They've got sellers, as far as they can tell, out the wazoo. And every buyer is precious. Every buyer is gold. So they have this sense, because there's not exclusivity, because sellers are listing with 20, 30 different agents, it's the buyers that they value. So they love the idea of somebody else bringing them buyers, but they're not really willing to let their buyers go somewhere else. And I think the core of that is this idea of exclusivity. One seller, one real estate agent. And that's something that we're working on. Obviously, the MLS works a lot better in an environment where the majority of the users are operating in these kind of exclusive arrangements. We've had to make compromises. You can't change a culture overnight. And so we basically said, look, within the MLS, only one person can represent a property. And we've tried to teach people the advantages and the ways, because I think most real estate agents love exclusivity, that they don't know how to get it.
Right.
And so we've tried to work through the real estate associations to have them educate their members on what are the arguments for exclusivity. And I've seen more listings that seem to be going that route, and really I've seen more agents that have picked up on how to argue that, have learned that they can make. I would say that there's more real estate agents that are learning how to make the arguments and make the case for having exclusive listings. And I think as that happens more and more, the MLS is going to take root more and more.
And I mean, really, we can obviously talk about this, from within the industry, but, we're really not that important when it comes down to it. The important people are the folks who are buying and selling real estate. And really from the buyer's perspective, it's traditionally been very difficult to find pertinent, accurate information on property in Ecuador. And, that's something we've tried to bring to the market. I think that's something you guys are absolutely bringing to the market. And I think really from the buyer's perspective, that's what's interesting about services and companies like yourself and like us, is just really to have that access, because, it wasn't very many years ago that, and in fact, it's still that way to some degree, that the vast majority of real estate was sold through word of mouth locally as opposed to any other way. So, that's something that in terms of your site, in terms of what we're trying to do, that's something that I think is really valuable for people who are thinking about Ecuador as a place to live and may or may not speak the language, may or may not be here on the ground looking for properties, but are nonetheless looking for properties, as would be the case in the States or in most of the world. However, hadn't been to a large degree in Ecuador in recent history.
I think our MLS is a great place to go to for good comparables. If you're out of the country and you're trying to make a decision about whether or not Ecuador is right for you, or we have a large number of our buyers that are looking between 3 or 4 different countries to decide where they might retire. And while there are other portals that are out there that have a good number of properties, one of the advantages in terms of providing good comparables that we have is that all of our properties are represented by real estate professionals. With the other portals, which are really advertising first and agent second, you get the majority of properties listed by the owners themselves. And I think owners might have a very different idea on what their property is worth than if they went through an agent and the agent was able to say, okay, look, this is what the market's doing. This is the real value of your home. Take it or leave it. If you insist that your $100,000 home is worth $250,000, we're not going to represent you. That kind of property doesn't end up on our MLS, whereas it might on a portal that would allow that homeowner to advertise directly. So I do think we've got about 2,500 properties on our system right now, and I think we've got properties in 15 different provinces in Ecuador, and I do think it's a great tool for somebody that's just starting to look at Ecuador right off the bat to get a sense of what's out there, how much they're going to pay, and to find really good comparables within the market.
That was very diplomatic of you, Ben. The owner who puts up who thinks that their property is worth maybe a little bit more than what the market will bear. I can say I know I can speak for Jesse in this, is that we come across that all the time, and we end up having to turn down listings a lot of times because of that. or in some cases because people
as
aren't.
a homeowner,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, speaking as a homeowner, I might have a $90,000 house, and if it only costs me $35 to put a listing up on a website, I may not be looking to sell for what I suspect that the price of my home is worth. But if I'm just throwing in $35, I'll list it for $250, and just who knows? It's a lottery ticket, right?
Right.
But as soon as it has to go through a real estate agent, I think you get much more reasonable comparables, because you guys aren't going to waste your time listing a property, promoting a property, taking the incredible photos that you guys are known for on a property that's not priced correctly.
And Ben, talk to us a little bit about the market in general, because it's been an interesting time. We've been in Ecuador for nearly 3 years. We've seen a lot of change in the time that we've been here. I think you've been here a little bit longer than we have. At the current time, we have an election coming up in 2017. We have oil prices low. We have the government cutting spending. We have banks not lending. The loans that people have taken out over the last 5 to 10 years are all in high interest, what we would consider high interest in places like the States. And it's kind of an interesting time in the market. I think, at least in the area that we are, prices have fallen to some degree since 2012. There was kind of a hot stretch there for some period of time, and then as this kind of crisis, so to speak, has enveloped Ecuador, we've seen some falling prices. We've seen homeowners who are selling under a bit of stress, some distressed properties. What are you seeing overall in the market from your perspective? And of course, real estate is local, so I know you're based in Cuenca, but I know you've lived on the coast and in other places. So maybe you could talk specifically about Cuenca and maybe a little bit about the country overall, because I know you have your finger on the pulse. But what are you seeing in terms of the real estate market in Ecuador and some of the trends as far as prices and things of that nature?
Well, I do think you were correct saying that the market in general in Ecuador is pretty hot.
So Ben, we cut out there for a second. Bad internet connection. As good as the internet is here in Ecuador, which it is, that's actually kind of a misnomer of people. People kind of think of Ecuador as a third world country, at least in their minds, maybe from Hollywood or whatever else they've seen. And in terms of infrastructure and all those kinds of things, it's really, first world in most ways. But anyhow, I was asking you about your experiences in the market. I had just mentioned to you in terms of phrasing the question about some of the economic difficulties that Ecuador is going through as far as low oil prices and the job market and banks not lending so much. And, we've seen some prices in real estate fall here in the Loja area for at least for certain types of properties. And I'm just wondering what you've seen overall, having your finger to the pulse of the market in Cuenca where you live, but you've lived in lots of other places, and obviously you run MLS, so you have your, you have the pulse of the market nationwide. So I just wanted to get a sense from you of what you're seeing in terms of trends in prices and in the real estate market overall.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think you're absolutely right. There is a bit of a perfect storm happening in Ecuador with low oil prices probably sparking everything. Everything that you've said is absolutely true. We've seen a lot of banks, approving people for loans locally and then saying you're approved, but we can't distribute the money for another 10 months, 12 months. And stuff like that obviously is putting downward pressure on the market. I mean, there's no two ways about it. I've seen certain cases where prices have dropped considerably. I've seen other cases where the same property is on the market and, it hasn't moved at all, even though everyone else around it is. And, you want to go to that person and say, well, how do you expect to get that much in this market? Because it's clearly not the market that it was 3 years ago. And there are a lot of people that look at it and say, I don't need to sell. And of course that's fine, but it still means that, you see properties that are priced like it's still 2012, and you see other properties that are priced, which actually account for what's actually going on. Something that my partner's father, who was a very successful real estate investor, once told me is that to make money in real estate, you don't make money on the sell, you make money on the buy. And what I took that to mean is, go out and find the great deal. Don't buy just anything on the market and assume that it's going to go up. Find the super deal.
Yeah.
And I think they're out there. We have seen some properties which are radically reduced in price. It should be a buyer's market right now, but that's not to say that everything is priced as such. In terms of traffic that we see on MLS Ecuador, the coast is still, the most popular place for international buyers. We see tons of, especially in the wintertime, we see tons of American and Canadian buyers, snowbirds that are looking for their beach getaway, which is 3 months, 4 months of wintertime vacation, and at the same time an investment property. We see a lot more traffic recently for people looking for fincas, farmland, and I know you guys should be benefiting from that. You all have a wonderful zone down in the Loja area that's extremely fertile. Great prices for fincas and that sort of property. I've seen the city prices drop considerably, so I think there are definitely deals to be had there. But it's all about being patient and finding the right seller that needs to sell, and taking advantage.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely seen a big uptick in people looking for farmland, and that's really our bread and butter in this part of the country. Properties in the city here, I think here specifically in Loja, people have been less ready to lower the prices wholesale. There might be, I think what's really changed here is that people have lowered their bottom line of what they're willing to take, while at the same time not lowering the asking price. So that's sometimes
that sounds very Ecuadorian.
From people who are outside of the country, asking prices tend to have a lot more weight, whereas here in Ecuador, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit, Ben, it seems to me as though asking prices just don't hold as much weight and don't necessarily need to.
We have a sense in the U.S. of what a serious offer would be, and really, if you're not within 5%, 7% of the asking price, there's almost a sense of, don't insult us. Mm-hmm. And here in Ecuador, as you all know, I've seen offers be accepted that were literally 20% of the asking price. Now, that's not a standard, and I certainly don't want you guys to get bombarded with offers that are 20% of the asking price. But that culture does exist here.
Yeah, and certainly 50 to 80% of the asking price is not out of the realm of normality.
Right.
It really just depends on the type of property that it is. I found in my experience, and Jesse, feel free to jump in on this, but with rural properties, you tend to have much more wiggle room in terms of prices. Absolutely. Whereas in the city, there tends to be more transactions, and so prices are definitely generally tighter.
Yeah, the market is better understood, really, because of what you're saying. There's more transactions. Hey Ben, so you've lived on. You're in Cuenca now. You've lived on the coast. Tell us a little bit about the things you like and maybe don't like about Cuenca, the things you liked and maybe don't like about the coast. What are the places in Ecuador that you recommend to people, or that you really had good or bad experiences in?
This country is extremely diverse. We've been fortunate enough to travel all over. We've time in the jungle. We've spent a good bit of time in the mountains, and a good bit of time on the coast as well. And all three of them, have the things that are great about them and the things that are not so great about them.
Sure.
I love the beach. I'm a bit of a beach bum. If I was looking to retire and just wanted, the days to flow by and enjoy walking around barefoot all the time, Ecuador has some absolutely fantastic beaches for some great deals. I particularly liked Alone, which is where we live. It's about 2 kilometers north of Montanita, right on the Ruta del Sol. That proximity to Montanita I really liked because Montanita is a bit of a party town, great restaurants, great nightlife, but you're outside of it. So you're not right in the middle of it 24/7. There are some other beaches in that area, Ayangue, Ayampe, Curia, which I think are great as well. Salinas is its own thing. It's sort of a large town, small city, huge expat community, great prices on condos. It's one of those places where you can still find an ocean view condo for, 100,000, 2 bedrooms, 120,000, 2 bedrooms. So we see a lot of retirees, expats looking at that area. I absolutely love Cuenca. Cuenca's been known as, the best place to retire in the world on a budget for some time, and I think that's absolutely true. We live on a farm about 4,000 meters. We've got a greenhouse. We've got chickens and guinea pigs, and it's really an incredible life that I've really enjoyed. At the same time, we're 20 minutes away from Cuenca, where, there are absolutely world-class restaurants, tons to do, great expat community. Loja and the surrounding area, I love as well. I think that would be my first place that I'd be looking if I was looking to buy acreage, buy a good amount of farmland. Extremely fertile soil, great prices. I've seen some incredible villas that you guys are marketing that just are mind-blowing. It would be hard for me to have a preferred area, I think, because there are so many great features of everywhere that we've lived, everywhere that we've known.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something we like a lot about Ecuador, is just how varied it is and how sweet it is in every area. I mean, you can go to Quito or Guayaquil and be in an international city. You can go to the Orient and be in the jungle. You can go to the coast and have that, which I really enjoy as well. I also, I've never been a beach bum, but I would like to be one.
He's an aspiring beach bum.
Right. And, obviously, the Sierra and the mountains are just incredibly beautiful. And you've got great weather all over the country. So we really feel the same way in some of those things. We kind of settled on our area really for some of the reasons that you mentioned in terms of the availability of land and the prices, and also the lack of sort of natural disaster stuff as far as volcanoes and earthquakes and things like that. But it's interesting to hear your perspective on those things. And Alone certainly is a hot area where a lot of expats are going, but there's really areas all over the coast. I don't think Ecuador really offers world-class, beach experience. You don't have turquoise water and white sand, but you've got very cheap prices and very nice in certain areas. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy in that way.
I think that's absolutely correct. Coming from Costa Rica, where you had this beautiful turquoise water and white sand right up to the beach. There were beaches that we visited there that were just beyond compare, but there were also, it was $1 million homes everywhere you looked. Ecuador's beaches still are accessible to, a middle class retiree, and I think that's what's bringing a lot of people down here.
And speaking of that, Ben, I know that at Property Shelf, you guys are involved in a lot of countries that are attracting interest from expats, particularly from the United States. In your opinion, how does Ecuador stack up with some of the areas that are attracting a lot of interest, places like Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Panama, Colombia?
In terms of our traffic count, Ecuador is blowing everywhere else away.
Really?
Absolutely, and that's not to say that's just interest, and I think a lot of that's price point, cost of living in general. But yeah, we see Ecuador is consistently ranked as, number one or number two of the best places in the world to retire, and we see that reflected with our traffic.
Well, that's really interesting and good to know for people who are considering relocating or retiring or having a second home in this part of the world. That's certainly been our experience with some of the inquiries that we get, that people tend to be fairly price conscious here, who are in the market at this point.
Yeah, I think that's true. If money's not an option, Costa Rica's there. The Bahamas are there. They're Caribbean beaches. And I think there are a lot of Americans, Canadians that have visited the Caribbean beach, and that's not what Ecuador is. Ecuador has a very laid-back vibe, a great standard of living, a great cost of living, and it's a great place to be. But I have seen people that have come down here sort of trying to compare it to where they went on their cruise 6 years ago. And I think if that's what you're looking for in Ecuador's beaches, you might be disappointed. Now, I have a good friend who spent a long time in Costa Rica, came down to Ecuador alone, visited that area, the Ruta del Sol, southern Ecuador coast. And at that point when he was down here, he saw prices beachfront, 50, 60 a meter.
Right.
And he made the mistake of trying to compare the beach, Costa Rica, what he'd seen there. And he said it was one of the biggest regrets that he's had here in Ecuador. And this is somebody who's been very successful business-wise. He said one of the biggest regrets that he's had in Ecuador was not recognizing that this is incredibly affordable beach property, because he was stuck comparing it. Well, in Costa Rica it was prettier, or here it was prettier. Well, yeah, that may be true, but it's 10 times as expensive.
Right.
And, for the majority of us, cost is a factor. It's a dominant factor. And so, it's something everyone has to figure out for themselves, I guess, is the best way to leave it.
Sure. And I mean, I've even found oceanfront lots for example, in Puerto Cayo, for even less than that, for $40 a square meter. Probably could even be had maybe for a little bit less. So those opportunities are certainly there. There's exceptionally inexpensive beachfront. And some of the beaches are very nice. Certainly not white sand and turquoise water, but still very nice.
And I think you can't underestimate the expat communities that are here. I mean, they're really great people that you meet, really great communities where there has been really good integration between locals and expats. I think Alone is a great example. I think Cayo is another great example. So, there's a lot to consider when you're making that decision.
For sure. And in terms of, and I think this has kind of been a theme throughout this whole podcast here, Ben, but any advice that you would give to people who are considering purchasing property in Ecuador, things that they should look out for, questions that they should maybe ask themselves to find out if Ecuador is the right place for them?
Got to be careful in how I respond to this, but I'll be as honest as I can.
Okay. We like honesty.
First of all, first of all, the advice that you'll hear from people a lot is rent before you buy. I think that's great advice. Especially if you're coming down here as an expat, especially if you haven't lived overseas before, give yourself 6 months. Just make sure you know what you're getting into. You know, I've seen so many people, and it's not just Ecuador; it's everywhere. We see the same turnaround in Costa Rica and Nicaragua, where you have people that come down and it seems like a fantasy, it seems like a dream, it all seems too good to be true, and then it is. Yeah. And you know, you can, as attractive as real estate prices are in so many areas, the rental prices are very attractive as well. You know, if someone's serious about coming down here full time and making this their retirement destination, and especially if they're talking about investing a large amount of their life savings, just rent for a little bit. Make sure this is something that they're going to enjoy and they're going to appreciate long term. Another bit of advice I would say is there's a law in Ecuador right now that requires all developments to run through a fiduciary. That would be like an escrow account for us. Some of them do and some of them don't. I would highly recommend, if you're going to buy into a development, especially a development that's early stages, that you confirm that they are running through a fiduciary, because you know it is risky, especially when you're dealing with internet developers. We haven't seen it with Ecuadorian developers nearly as much, but I'm sure it's out there. But we've seen a few just major fails by American developers, Canadian developers, and I don't want to paint with broad strokes here. We've seen some fantastic successes with American developers and Canadian developers. But I would say try to push your developer, if you want to buy in a community, to use that escrow, use that fiduciary. It's an important protection that's available to you. It's available to you under the law. And personally, I would steer clear of anything that wasn't utilizing that.
Yeah, I mean, really, you know, as we always tell people, and as we exist as a company to help people with, it's really what I'm hearing from you is, you know, do your due diligence. Whether that includes, you know, renting and seeing if you like the place, but also, you know, doing your due diligence on the entire purchase and sales process and what you're buying into, and, you know, how the visa works and all those kinds of things.
I think that's correct. You know, take your time. If you come down here and you don't speak Spanish, there are plenty of people here, they call them facilitators, that are really here to help you. There's a great online community of expats down here that, you know, you should plug into long before you come down. So much advice is available. So many people share their mistakes. And, you know, I know so many people that this has been a dream come true for. They moved down here and they absolutely love it and they would never go anywhere else. And, you know, I think all of the information was out there and people were a little more cautious before they jumped. Everyone could have that experience.
So, Ben, before we wrap up, so they can find you guys at MLS-Ecuador.com. You guys are in Spanish and English, correct?
That's correct. I think we're the largest portal right now in Ecuador that has listings in both languages. Again, that's MLS-Ecuador.com. And yeah, we've got a great variety of properties, some great agents. The agents that use our systems all have gone through the real estate licensing course that's here in Ecuador, which I think is a huge advantage for them. You know, there are a lot of American real estate agents that come down here that, you know, are ready to sell to Americans.
And I think there's a big difference between the ones that have gone through the course, learned Ecuadorian law, learned how to navigate not just sales in general, but the Ecuador system. So yeah, we'd swing by the website, MLS-Ecuador.com, and check it out.
Great. Well, yeah, do you want to add something? Go ahead, Darnell.
Yeah. Well, anything else you'd like to plug while you got you on the line here, Ben? No, we really, in all seriousness, we really appreciate you joining us. But seriously, do you have anything else that you want to cover before we wrap up?
No, it's been a pleasure, Darnell and Jesse. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk tonight.
Yeah, well, Ben, thank you so much. And again, people can find your website at mls-ecuador.com. You can find us at abecuador.com, A as in apple, B as in boy, ecuador.com. And we thank you so much for joining us tonight. Many thanks to you, Ben, for being with us. Great show. We really appreciate your time. And we'll talk to you all soon. Take care.
All right, all the best.
All right. Thanks, Ben. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, guys. Have a great night. Drink some Club for me.
Will do. Have a good one. Talk to you soon.
Cheers. Bye-bye.